Oliver is a good friend of ours. He is a member of our committee, UK and Ireland Chapter Committee. And Oliver has a degree in psychology and uses that through his work and what he does on a daily basis. Oliver's going to talk us through the psychology of marketing, which is really going to help us, combined with our sales and so on. So I'm not going to say any more on that because I don't know a lot about psychology, but hopefully by the end of his session, I'll know a lot more. Oliver, over to you.
I'm going to put a disclaimer in straight away and say a little more. Oliver Hone, I'm the marketing director at IMX Group. This is a good example, actually, straight from the off of why you should always present or at least run your presentation by somebody else who doesn't know what it is and so on. I ran this past somebody last night, and that slide was different. It said, "What do I know?" After my mother had finished criticising me, as only mothers can do, at length, I changed it to "Why me?" Why me? Well, it's simple, really, because I'm a failure. And what I mean by that is I'm actually a failed criminal psychologist. I graduated with a degree in 1991 in psychology, and I specialised in criminal psychologists. This is was a time, a year and a half before Silence of the Lambs came out in this country, about 4 years before Cracker. We all know about criminal psychologists now, but at the time it was very difficult to break into. I was determined to get into a constabulary and work on that. That never happened. They never took me. In the meanwhile, I got a job, amazingly, just down the road in a factory in Birmingham. And at first, I was literally, to make money, because you had to pay for the bills, as I said, middle of recession then, I was doing a very manual job, and I kept instructing the managing director about how I thought he should be doing his sales and marketing. And this is something, the confidence that you get only just after you've got out of university to tell managing directors of companies you're working for how to do their jobs. It worked. He basically said to me, "I am sick to death of you telling me how to do my marketing, so you come and do it." So that's how I started, really. 1991, working in marketing. And I've since worked all the way through the ranks. And as I said, I'm now proudly the marketing director of the IMX Group. Just to put it into context, I've only been in the events industry for about 3.5 years. I came from an entirely different industry background. So the skills that marketing has and the abilities are transferable. It's a fantastic industry, though, to actually apply what you know. I mean, what's psychology got to do with marketing? It's got a lot, really. Mike and Peter both yesterday were very helpfully, and as part of their basis, if you like, of talking, we're talking about connections at the very basic level, physiological, and John was talking about it as well, the way that synapses work. That's really what psychology is, ultimately, is how the brain works and how it makes the connections. It then widens up into perception, into how we interact with each other, social interaction, and awareness, how we perceive the world, what we want to see, how we do it. And psychology has an ability to be able to steer, if you like, and influence that, which then plays into marketing. Marketing is, and I think this is an important point that sometimes gets a bit confused, it's not selling at all. Sales is very much its own job. Marketing, and us in any marketing department, are really like the armourers, if you like. We are the people that are able to give you the knowledge, the abilities, the tools, if you like, to then go out and do it. But that power of persuasion and how we work and can weave psychology, if you like, into it is a valuable skill that you should look at for your marketing and come into and try and apply where you can. There is lots and lots and lots of work on this. I have to say that as a junior marketeer in the 1990s, I didn't have the great asset that we have now. Mike referred to it yesterday, of course. The amount of information that is available on the internet now compared to what was then is vast. And if you're prepared to take the time and look it through, then you can actually do your own work and kind of, if you'll excuse the pun, given my surname, hone your marketing into what's good. If you want to know what it's called, if you're a classically trained marketeer, unlike me, I'm a psychology degree, but if you've got a degree in marketing, you don't call it the psychology of marketing, you call it consumer behavior theory. So if you're going to Google it, that's what you need to use rather than the psychology of marketing. I learnt many things that you carry with me. There's a lot of psychology research, there's lots of up-to-date research and so on, and John and Metology will do an inordinate amount of work, as they said earlier on. But there's also the sort of classic psychology as well that still stands true to basically form opinions and work that is done. We talked initially about connections. This is hugely important. We can't stress how valuable this is, because when you learn something, the way you're most likely to do it is by rehearsal. That's how you know your times table so well. Likewise, any kind of action, interaction, belief, opinion you hold comes from the amount of times that you make connections in your brain. You can then spit it out. There's another interesting classic psychological theory, if you like, that comes to bear. It dates from 1948, but it's still used in this day and age, and even in things that we've done today, the hierarchy of needs. Quick show of hands, who knows or understands what the hierarchy of needs are? Okay, about half, so that's great. It's a theory that basically says that there are levels in which you have to work up to fulfill what you need. Once these are essentially seen as buckets, effectively. So once you can only move up to the next level in theory if you've fulfilled one. At the lowest level is the classic biological and physiological needs. So food, air, drink, warmth, shelter, like that. Only when you've kind of started to go up the rankings and so on there can you actually get to the next level. The idea is that the higher you go, the more fulfilled or the more able you are to do what you do. Essentially, even like today now, what have we just had? A cup of tea. Or what did come in and welcome? Where are we? These feel the sort of the classic things to do first. Get a tea, get a bit of food inside you, so on and so forth. Get you into an environment that makes you feel fine, safe. I mean, these are obviously, to a degree, primeval feelings as well, but actually they're fit. And then you can start getting to where we need to be from a marketing point of view, which is the esteem level and the cognitive level. And I'll weave some of the examples that I've got into there about how we need to match those levels there. So in fact, we're already an experiment in action, if you like, because I said, because we've been fed and watered, brought in and made to feel self, we can now do the learning level, which if we were feeling a little bit hungry or there was no water and so on, we probably wouldn't concentrate on as much. So experiment in action, psychology in action. These connections, and particularly this sort of this want to belong and this need for identity, is the classic sort of thing that marketeers play on. And it takes us to what is essentially the holy grail of marketing, the brand. When we do that, we have to make sure that the brand is, when we apply the brand and what we are, what we stand for, it's to define out to what people see of us and basically also help to give associations. So if you want to be young and fresh and funky, your brand has to be that reliable, efficient, whatever it may be. And of course, there are all the classic brands that you know about, the Nikes, the Coca-Colas and so on. But within our own industry, making sure that that brand there has a consistent and ability to be able to reach out and for people to identify with is the part of which essentially fits into that need for belonging and identity. The classic place that we see all of these and which you should look to apply is any campaign. If you have a particular way of marketing, a logo, an icon, so be it. But within that, you need to work through campaigns which then take out and explain and give the ability to associate. One of the reasons why campaigning is important from a marketing point of view is the idea that people get bored or habituated, is the classic expression. In other words, they get used to seeing the same thing over and again. So it is a sensible idea every now and then, I know budgets are so on are the way that they are and so on, to look at refreshing or revitalizing or moving on your brand every 2.5, 3 years. It's given credibility and credence in that time, but that's then time for it to sort of revise and refresh. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul, but it can be a tightening up and moving on. The other thing about it, and again, this has relevance about connectivity and connections, is that however you apply your brand, make sure it's there all the way through you do it, whether it is from the lowest level, if you like, of the logo itself. But if you've used particular styling, imagery, and so on, make sure that everything that goes out in then carries that. Because what happens is You get the people see an email that looks like the pop-up that they're seeing, that they relate to in the print advertising that they have seen, and so on. And it kind of constantly reaffirms what you are. If your marketing has done its job that perhaps you'd like it to do in the first place, which is to set out and almost to define who you are without words, if you like, without saying it or without the sales pitch that you need, but an almost sort of like secondary level thing, then every time, and if that has worked and that's what you've achieved, every time you have a campaign or any element of the campaign that goes out that hasn't got the name on, it should still trigger that kind of association. So the wider you get it, the more comprehensive it is, and the more it repeats that message in every form or whatever, gives that association time and time again that people will take to, remember, and then relate to, so that when you go for what is essentially what we're here for, the tipping, of, if you like, of the selling, then there is that cognitive recognition of who you are, what you stand for, and so on. John talked about authority, and research that we've also done in psychology also looks at this very important aspect of it. In other words, it's been shown that when you listen to something, for example, there was an experiment where people were told a blatant lie, but they were told by somebody that they were told was either a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher. And they were told the same, or in a similar group, were told exactly the same lie, but they were told it by a greengrocer, a record salesman, and a policeman. And it turned out that in all of the cases where the higher authority, the believable side and so on, the lie was actually believed rather than the other way, because people trust authority. The other piece of advice here as well that fits in is that people go for authority and believe it much more if it comes from somebody else. So if I want to talk about IMEX, and by the way, I'm going to put this in now. A lot of the examples that I've got up now here are IMEX because I have to do the BBC disclaimer. Other shows are available. But the fact of the matter is that when I talk about IMEX, the best people to talk about IMEX from a marketing point of view isn't anybody from IMEX. It's people such as yourselves and others who have come and made comments about it, because third-party testimonial and so on is much, much stronger. How does this reflect? How do I know this? Well, it's interesting. We do a huge amount of campaigning and all of its classic marketing forms for IMEX. And then everybody goes, great. And then everybody comes back, fantastic. And they give us the testimonials. Brilliant, I've got my marketing collateral and materials done. And then we send them a survey. And what's interesting about it is that I look at the survey and I see what people say made them come, made them choose to come to IMEX. These are for the visitors specifically. We've got lots of examples of other ways. Obviously, if you're an exhibitor, that's it. But these are for the visitors. What made you come to IMEX? Despite the fact that the huge amount of advertising, emailing, so on went out, the fact of the matter is that the three most popular reasons that people cited were they'd attended IMEX in Frankfurt before, and then recommendation and word of mouth. Both third-party testimonials, both ways of it out. Now, I know for a fact that when you look at things like the click-through rates and why people registered and when, the reality is it's actually the email that's sent out. They reacted to it and like that. But when you push them about what is the reason why they came to choose to IMEX, invariably it's not because IMEX made me, but it's because somebody else told me to go, as well as experience. So the power of authority then, my recommendation is take your endorsements, take your case studies, and take your quotes. Time and again I see that effect happen. Within that also is tied another element we've touched on a couple of times, which is trust. If you are going to use people as examples or quotes or testimonials or whatever it is, you have to qualify it. It's not good enough to say just the quote. The only way people accept that it is a legitimate way is to actually give the names and titles. Top tip, get their permission. We do have in the past had people come back in and say, this was published, I'd rather you didn't say that, that's fine. So we now vet very clearly and ask permission. Most people are delighted. Do what we do in our survey. I don't know what survey tools people use. We use SurveyMonkey. It's very simple. And I've got one question that makes more difference to me than any of the open-ended questions in the survey. That question is, can we use anything that you have said in this survey for marketing and promotional materials? Yes, no. Anybody that says yes has automatically given consent, and therefore you don't have to worry about chasing up. So another way of looking at it. And finally, two more pieces of advice, which I'm going to slip in now, which wasn't even in my presentation, but I think I ought to bring up, is that if you are going to use what I would consider sort of tailored or treated pictures of people, photographs that you've taken, which might be at your event, might be at your venue, might be anything like that, go and get their permission. Make sure you do it. It's quite a tricky little business. If you put round your company, does anybody recognize this person? You're only going to get, there was 14,000 people at IMEX. How do you think I'm going to recognize that one? But the reality is that you have to find ways and means. The second point that I would make is also, if you are using photographs from any of the libraries, in this day and age, it's very easy to search a photograph. Make sure that you've got the permission to use it in whatever way. In other words, try and use photographs that you proprietarily own. Getty Images in particular are very, very, very good at finding photographs that you or your clients or whatever may have used and coming after you. So just make sure that you have that permission. Those would be the ones that I would throw in on the side. Excuse me. The next thing that I learned at university that I took away with me, all those years ago that I took away with it, that I still apply, is the research about attention and retention. The first part I'm going to talk about, critically important for marketeers, is layout and presentation. I'm not going to give up all the statistics and show the examples or whatever, but the person that influenced me, and again, very Googleable, was a psychologist called Patricia Wright, who did a lot of work on the study of how people read layouts of pieces of paper, information, emails. And even though I learnt that when I was at university, which I left in 91 or whatever, I still refer back to that work that she had done and still up until the early 2000s, that talked about the layout and how best to attract attention. It looks at how people read, about how quickly they skim things, what they're drawn to, and then how much they retain afterwards. If you are using sales materials, which are essentially marketing-led, like that, the ability to be able to give information over in that way that you know is going to be retained is an important and valuable thing to worth looking at the way your marketing materials look. The best thing to do is actually to summarize it and use a variety of different ways of producing information. An at-a-glance sheet is probably one of the most effective tools out of everything that we do that gives people what they want. Lots of exhibitors, hopefully those of you that have been at IMEX in Frankfurt, 6 weeks ago or whatever, should have had a copy of this given to you anyway. But it's a summary that brings out whatever. We have lots of other materials to give you and for you in terms of sales brochures or whatever. But this summary of how to work, details, figures, and so on, at a glance, as we call it, is probably one of the most effective and useful ways that you can get the message across, both in terms of obviously attracting in the first place, but then the famous need to get ROI across. The reason why it's up there on the left is because although I applied the principles of my design agency that I'd learnt about how to read it, that still wasn't good enough. So we developed it and had a look and then made it marginally different. I hope you can see that there are subtleties and differences, but the reality is that we've packaged it even better and streamlined it in such a way that it should be even more accessible, easy to understand and to use. Within that as well, there's also the levels of processing. And psychological research shows that when you show people something or they have given it to read or whatever, at different times of the day, depending on what their external and internal factors are or whatever, they will want to absorb it in different ways. They might want to skim read it, or they might want to go into a lot of depth. They might want a few key facts, they might want prose and so on. So the key to this actually is to making sure that your marketing material reflects this, by having a ability to be able to reach, I think, probably about 4 levels, if you like, of way that people read it in terms of a blend of prose and facts and figures and so on. That then means that you can get most of the buttons or press most of the buttons for people that they would want. In other words, taking and absorbing that information, which again is the foundation, if you like, for the later push for the sales itself, the conversion. In our case then, we only published this yesterday, so this has come out of the IMX sales brochure. There are different ways of making sure that those 2 pages are next to each other, that people can absorb it at different levels. If they want to take it down and take the time to read the full thing, they've got full text there. If they've got headlines to give you an idea, they've got tables and charts for a quick reference point. They could either read the whole lot or take the headline. And if you think about how newspapers work, for example, the classic headline, photograph, columns and so on, little box or whatever, that's doing exactly the same thing. My advice with anything that you give out, whether it's a pitch presentation support document or whether it's your own brochure and so on, is actually think about different levels. Each page should have this ability to be able to speak to different people at different times who want different things. Now, my favourite one in a way, the attention span. I know this, and I'm standing up here and I'm slightly worried about it as I would be about it. The reality is that I've seen some excellent presentations, and I'm not just saying this, but I think the ones that we've seen yesterday and today have been superb. I've seen some utterly dire ones, and generally speaking, I know what it is, the big mistake that everybody makes. It comes down to attention. Attention is like a sine wave. It goes in and out and in and out. The longer you can make that sine wave and keep that attention, the more effective it is. But if you are doing a presentation like this one or a sales pitch or whatever, if you don't keep the attention and the retention of the attention of detail, you will lose that person. And then once you've lost that person, it's very, very, very difficult to get them to snap back in again. There's all sorts of psychological research about how long people study for, how long people retain information, how long they're prepared to pay attention to you, and so on, and how to keep that thing. But I've got my one piece of advice, which I see very occasionally, but I want to go through it here. The use of the PowerPoint slide. Now, the fact of the matter is that people, and we saw this in action yesterday when Mike brought John up to read the second column. Do you remember that? And it was the way that John couldn't process the colour, the actual colour, because he was too busy reading. He'd got the reading first. And I thought, brilliant. I couldn't have wanted for a better example than the one, because this is going to do exactly what I do. People read much, much, much faster and absorb the written word much quicker than any other way of absorbing a presentation. So my point is that if you put any point you put up, the point is that any point you put up and read out will have been read long before you finish reading it out. If you had said 3 or 4 points, if you had, say, 3 or 4 points up, chances are they are all read before you've finished the first. Now, before you know it, or you've finished even, the material has been digested and then appears repetitive or of no value. And what is the end result of this? Well, the end result of this is loss of attention and the power of the point, or the presentation's lost, or worse, becomes negative. I do see this. I groan inside when that happens. I've lost all of your attention. If you were interested, you would have read that long before I got to the word out there. You know it is as simple as this. You know what's coming. You've already read it. You've already understood it. So why is that man telling me something I already know? You only know it because you've read it. But nevertheless, I then lose authority as a speaker. You lose interest, both in my confidence in me to be able to speak or tell you anything you know, and actually you're probably switching off and zoning out. And if, rather like my positioning on terms of that Israeli chart at the moment, we're heading rapidly towards lunch, I'll tell you what, I'm not in a good place. So what is my advice? Well, there's another thing as well that was touched on, the magical number. Psychologically, the rule of 3. How can I apply this to do presentations and so on? Let me go through something else first. This is a number that I remember. It's really, really, really old. Would anybody like to guess what that number is? People from Birmingham might get it a lot quicker. It is my old house telephone number from a house that I left in 1994. And I still remember it. But do I remember 01217041521? No, I don't. I remember 0121 704 1521. I've broken it up into 3 blocks. Nobody write this down, right? But my mobile number, I mean, I know lots of people now give it, I know. All right, I'm not going to give the number out. Recite in your head, those of you that can actually give out your mobile number without either a business card or exchanging the things out. If you can give your number out, think how you recite that number out. And I'm almost certain you've got it broken into 3. Yeah. The power of 3, the rule of 3.
Well, it's worth pointing out as well that, remember we had the 1 put in, it threw so many people.
Yeah.
Or when London went 0208.
Yeah.
People could remember the numbers, even though there's only 1 digit added. Because of that.
That's because of the rehearsal aspect, the anticipation, the expectation, and so on and so forth. What's really weird is you can actually drive around London now, and very occasionally you still see either 01 or 0171, and you're like, wow, look at that. My favourite, right, again, I'm going off-piste, here we go. My favourite telephone number of all time is a paper company called Wiggins Teep, and they were based in London. Why do I know their telephone number? Why did the world know their telephone number all those years ago in London? Because their telephone number was 01234 5678. There we go. That's the kind of asset you can't pay very, very good money for. Anyway, going back to my rule of 3 then. Everything works in 3s in the way that people remember, in the way that they work, and the way that they think. And recalling and so on. The likelihood is if you've delivered a package of 3, the recollection is much likely to be that. Going back to the at-a-glance sheet that we had up there, it was only when I shifted it into groups of 3s that it looked much better than the line there. It's just the way people see it, and it's got a long, long, long history. Martin Luther King always used to talk about in 3 things like liberty, freedom, and so on. The Holy Trinity, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. It's got a long, long and great history. And I was delighted. There was a little tick by my thing when John actually mentioned the number 3. It's a very positive psychological thing. How does this work for, say, presentations then, or indeed what we're doing? So, it can be anything you want, but my one for you for this one is 3 takeaway points will work. Be brief. John was saying the longer anything is, the more difficult it is to retain or understand or indeed subscribe to or whatever. Shorter, punchier, better. And finally, in this case, bring them in one by one. Very important one for that simple reason that you then avoid what happened earlier on. Those were the ideas that I had, and practically and so on, that I wanted to share with you. As I say, there's a lot of work that's been done that can be applied. Marketing is a very different skill from selling itself. The truth of the matter is that I'm absolutely honest. And in my career, particularly in my career as when I was in recruitment consultancy, when I was working as a marketeer, I was asked a number of times, could I be a salesman? Would I be a recruitment consultant, essentially? And the answer is no, it's not something I could do. It works in different ways. So you have to think about those skill sets in such a way. Marketing, sometimes I get a little frustrated because marketing is seen, if you like, as it can sell. It doesn't sell, it helps you sell. And that's the point to it, really. Hopefully with some of these insights, I've given some ideas about how you can use and think about how people work. But as I said, if you look into your own way and research consumer behavioralism, there's plenty of work on there. And also, I love talking about marketing. I'm delighted Pam's here as an actual marketing manager because the poor girl is going to get her ear chewed off by me later or whatever. But the reality is that the biggest value about marketing is its ability to share. So if there's anything you want and more than that, or we can go through, please ask. And like I said, I would be very, very happy to talk that through. Now, do I open it up to the floor? Then I open it up to the floor, and if there's any questions, I'm very happy.
You mentioned before about getting permission for marketing work going into the events. As you say, kind of working on very large number of events, that's really difficult.
Yeah.
One of the strategies we've tried to use is on entrance to the event, but it's signposts that come in that be a bit more robust and go a bit further with that?
I think it depends on exactly how you're using it. The reality is that very few people noticed it, but as they walked through the doors into IMEX, they would have walked past a sign, exactly as you've said, that said, it basically says, by walking past this sign, you've just sold your soul to IMEX marketing department. What it really says is any photographs that are taken entering the hall gives IMEX the permission to use your image. Likewise, it's also worth putting on, sometimes this gets forgotten, is that when you have acceptance for people to attend events, it's part of the terms and conditions that we put in to make sure. So we have all of that in place, and it's a very good thing to do. I think if you're using, it's a judgment call really, a balance. If you're using show shots or even, a busy booth shot or so on, I've just realised something that I'll come to that in a second. While Karen's looking at me, I'm thinking, oh my God, she's the star of one of our adverts. But there we are. Sorry, to go back to the point. You have to make a judgment call. Wide vistas, right? Lots of aisle shots. You're not going to get the permission. I think it's covered there. I think it's more about how you use the shots. I will be frank with you in this room. We, 2 years ago for IMEX, had the branding designs and the campaign design so that it very much focused on one or two people. And then kind of took the background out and then had it sort of drawn in stylistically. We'd taken a shot, say, like of this table here and focused on Samantha and removed the rest. By focusing on her and using her, that then made them more key. And what happened is we were approached by a couple of people who essentially had said that we had made them models, and we had to come to an agreement with them as such. So that's it. We learned from there. The next year, which is 2013, the branding you would have just seen for Frankfurt, we approached everybody because we knew we were going to treat those photographs. So it's that kind of balancing act, really. You have to make a judgment call on how you're going to use them and how to put them out. Generally speaking, show shots, busy booth shots, and so on like that, generally covered by the catch-alls, but make sure they're there. I think the biggest thing about it was that in the year that we were caught out, we kind of went, but it's in the terms and conditions. Oh, no, it's not. So there we are. So yeah, do that. That is a very good fail-safe and is quite strong, if you like. But actually, in some ways, if you're going to take it a little bit further, look and seek for that permission. It's really difficult to do as well. This thing about badges, if they flip around, the only way a photographer can get good photographs is if he does it naturally, the reportage style. You can't then go up and go, I know we've just taken a great photograph of you doing amazing business. Can I just take your photograph of your badge? So that's another thing as well. That's kind of a bit of a challenge, is actually finding them. I've had to discard brilliant photographs that I want to use because we simply don't know who they are. So judgment call. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Excellent. Hello.
I'm not sure there's time for you to reply to this question, but I studied marketing way back.
Yes.
Before internet and things, and I struggle to understand how marketers these days make decisions about which channels to use with the plethora of social media. You do lots of research into the usage of different social media amongst different target groups.
Absolutely. I did wonder if the social media sort of word would come up, if you like, and that's because I didn't put it in this presentation because that opens up a whole different discussion, if you like, and so on. It's a very valuable tool. The interesting thing about it is that social media isn't marketing, and marketing isn't social media. They are distinct. But the reality is that it has a place to play, if you like, and it becomes another channel. And what you have to do is just make sure that you evaluate each channel. I mean, another conversation that I had the other day is, only yesterday when we were doing Mike's session in the afternoon, is, what is the value of above-the-line advertising? What is it about print advertising, and does it still have its place? Yes, it does. But you have to do that research, that look into it, and so on, to make sure that it has it. If you go back, have I got time quickly to flick back? The question to do it is the research that you could do at any level is even as simple as in any kind of post-show survey, is to ask the questions of where you find it. You'll see that social media is part of it down there. That's growing as well. But no marketeer or nobody working with marketing should actually think about using any channel without doing the research and the testing, if you like, of how effective it is or otherwise. Don't listen to what a magazine says, I'm sorry to say, how effective they are, but do your own research into it. What do you read? What do you do, and so on and so forth. Likewise, what social media channels do you do? And then we pick and place it accordingly. We tend to use social media, just very quickly, as a sort of follow-on and a broadcaster. So we bring out a brochure or we bring out a newsletter, and then we follow that up with the getting it out that way in the classic way. And we find that most effective. But yeah, you must look into it. No marketeer would be so foolish as to not decide, not investigate where to put everything first. But the reality remains that all channels are and should be open. Answer your question? Excellent.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Ready for time?
All right, yeah.